Welcome to the Therapist Burnout Podcast, episode 105. Hey, therapist. I am talking to you a little bit about this question. Are therapist certifications an MLM? Because I'm thinking they might be. That's what a lot of you said on LinkedIn anyway. I'll get to some of the LinkedIn roundup in the comments. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you should be, because I'm there like sometimes. So come find me there. I think we're answering this real question. Not whether or not training is good or bad, but is it really solving the problem that we needed to solve? And why are we doing it anyway? I wanted to share a story. So I've shared on the podcast before, but maybe it's been a minute. I started out in private practice out of necessity. So I was a new mom and I thought I would go back to my agency job. I really did. So I had daycare set up, all those things lined up. And then my son had heart surgery and I didn't want to leave him and I couldn't leave him. I had postpartum anxiety and caregiver burnout possibly at that point. Maybe that was burnout 2.0. Burnout 1.0 was what I think I've gone through 1, 2, and 3.0 on this podcast. But anyway, that caregiver burnout was significant for me. And I really was not able to go back to work when I needed to go back to work for that particular position. So I looked around at jobs that might be flexible, that it would allow me to be home most of the time with my son who just had heart surgery. This was before telehealth. So this was, he's 12 now, almost 13. So this was quite a while ago. And so telehealth really wasn't a thing. There wasn't a lot out there for therapists or psychologists to do that weren't outside the home. So here we go. I launched a private practice. I remember distinctly saying in grad school, I never want to open a private practice. I don't want to be a business owner. And I've been a business owner now for 12 years. So sometimes, and I think this is true, we find our way to entrepreneurship and to private practice out of necessity versus design. When I meet people and when I meet therapists rather who came to private practice and that was like, I always wanted to be in private practice. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I think they're kind of a unicorn because I don't think that most people think that way. So, I had this little private practice. I also still kept teaching online. So I was teaching as a professor for an online university at the time who has now since gone under and are no longer an institution. So that ended sometime, maybe when my son was a couple years old. So not all my income came from my practice. So that felt kind of good because I did have an income stream that was not tied to being in the therapy chair. And my practice became something like another baby, which I tell you, your practice isn't your other baby. It is a business. It is a career. It doesn't have to be your career. It can be it is a business though. And it can give you flexibility. It can be really good. I know I left private practice, but for some people, it makes a lot of sense to be in private practice, at least part-time or some of the time to have some of your work be therapy work. So I'm not anti-private practice. I'm just for you having really good reasons why you're doing it. And I noticed something like once I became full for me, which I love this question in therapist spaces, how many clients is full for you? It really depends on the person and it really depends on your financial goals. So I noticed this knowledge gap, and I think the knowledge gap was there in some ways because I didn't receive trauma training. I had a trauma class in grad school because I worked as a caseworker before I became a psychologist, and I knew a lot of the impacts of trauma. However, I wasn't trained in a trauma modality to help someone recover from said trauma. I think on postdoc, I got into prolonged exposure and had one of those evidence-based books. And I had a supervisor walk me through some of that and just say, here's the book, here we go. Which now in retrospect, I think a lot of us were given that instruction. Like, here is the manualized treatment. Go ahead and do that manualized treatment for this client. However, did not receive any said instruction on said manualized treatment and were expected to just do it. And I noticed this knowledge gap. And I also not acknowledged that I didn't have the support that I needed. So my partner is a psychologist, so a lot of times I do consult with my partner, but my partner is not trained. I take that back. So my partner was trained in cognitive processing therapy, but I think did it with a few clients. So they are trained in a trauma modality. I should give them credit. So I used them for some consultation, but I think it's just so different in private practice when you don't have someone down the hall, a peer to go to say, "Oh my gosh, I had this horrible session or this difficult session and I didn't know what to do. And what do you do in this situation?" So I think there's a feedback loop that you have when you're in the office with people that you don't have when you're in private practice. And I think also like the gap really, part of me thought, why do we have this gap in our training to not have trauma competency or to not have competency in modalities that are evidence based for certain conditions? And I think for trauma, especially, it was also the era. I don't think it was as popular at the time, and research does take time. So I think that kind of goes into understanding. Let's see what the context was here. All right. I am fresh from a training, so I'm recording this like segment of the podcast. I recorded about 6 minutes of this and then it's been a minute. It's been like a week. Yeah, I just got back from a training. So I think this is relevant because I have been going to a local school psychologist training. So I live in the great state of Maine, and shout out to MASP in Maine. It's our Maine Association of School Psychologists, and it's at this like nice little hotel locally here to me. And I swear I'm going to have a therapist training there one day because they serve chocolate torte for lunch as part of the training. I swear half the time I just go for the food, but I also go because there's great community and great training. So it is good training, but it's not like specific to a certification. And one of the recommendations I tell people is, why don't you go to a training locally if you want to get your training hours and meet some people that you might actually have some interactions with in the wild in real life. And so that happens, and it's nice to see the same kind of faces every year, and twice a year I go. So that's been most of my training focus as I've been working as a school psychologist since closing my private practice in 2023, which it's been 3 years as of almost like in a couple days. It'll be 3 years that I started recording this podcast and closed my practice. And so, yeah. So, jumping into our next segment on certifications, are they an MLM or what are we doing here? I think when in around 2006, and that's when I entered my doctoral program, they really were emphasizing CBT and manualized models. I think I did have a trauma class in my training, and I worked with therapeutic foster care children. So I knew the impacts of trauma on myself as a worker because I was exposed to children who had trauma. And I think it was more discussed conceptually versus having actual training in how to do the modality. And I still don't remember having actual training in a specific therapy modality. So I got some training in listening skills. So, how to mirror someone, how to do reflective listening, how to offer feedback, those types of things. I had group therapy training where we had an in process group in the actual class. But I'm trying to think, I mean, that wasn't a modality, it was doing basic skills related to counseling, which of course we need. Of course, we need that basic understanding of our field. And um, what else? Oh, we did have, which I don't think all programs do. So we had a clinic on our school, and we had like this tunnel. I think they called it the tunnel, where you can like view the session of your trainee. My my supervisor, which actually was implicated in what is that thing? Oh, he started 7 Cups. I'm trying to describe this. It's like a peer-to-peer listening service, which was then data mining therapist data. And it was this kind of thing on LinkedIn. That was my supervisor who started that company. So he didn't go into the little training thing and view me, but he did review my tape. So I will say that. I don't know what was up with all that. I was kind of surprised, and I have somewhat of a presence on LinkedIn. And so in my small sphere on LinkedIn, I was like, yeah, that was my actual clinical supervisor in my doctoral training. Random. Okay. So I feel like the somatic training, nervous system training, it wasn't something it was mentioned. It was more your head. We're focused on CBT, we're focused on behavioral therapy. That was the focus in my training. And EMDR really had this like voodoo vibe about it. It was like, I don't even know what that is. Don't do it. That's just weird. So it really wasn't discussed. And I didn't hear about anyone using it until I was on postdoc. And my supervisor in postdoc really loved it and talked about it. I think they had been to a training, so they had talked about it and loved it, but didn't really do it. So it wasn't modeled to me to do it. I was given a DBT book and was like, yeah, let's run a DBT group in the clinic and study this manual and do it. That was my training on that. So, if PTSD wasn't formally in the DSM till 1980, most structured trauma treatments developed in the 90s, really in the early 2000s. So, I think we have to notice. I think I had this view of my training that it wasn't sufficient in having me trained on what I actually needed to do. And I still feel that way, but I also want to notice that a lot of these therapies were still developing at that time. We know that trauma, especially, is prevalent with like 60% of men and 50% of women experiencing at least one traumatic event, and about 6% of Americans develop PTSD. So I saw trauma certainly on internships, certainly on postdoc, certainly throughout my training. And it was kind of like we don't really dive into that, especially in your early training days, because you're not ready for that. So just kind of focus on kind of therapy of the day. Let's do some CBT with them, work on their anxiety, depression, but sidestep the trauma or refer them out to a trauma therapist. So I was never really taught to handle it head on. And then also kind of implicitly trained to be scared of addressing someone's trauma. And doesn't that seem counterintuitive that our training as therapists, we don't feel competent in something that is very prevalent in our work? So I feel like there's multiple systems at play, which is usually the case. I feel like trauma care was developing and it still is. And I don't think it's explicitly trained for our training programs. So I think something for us as a field to consider, that should we be doing more explicit training in these models that are evidence based in our initial training? I think we should, but it's not part of it yet. And so I think that has to do with our governing bodies and our state boards as well. What competencies do we want a professional to have when they enter the field? So I think we need to come together and do some more of that. So it felt like when I hit the ground running for my private practice, I needed training in EMDR. I was working with people after brain injury. And what I found was that my folks were traumatized. And so they were traumatized from the event of their brain injury. And it was the missing piece that wasn't handled. Also, their anxiety and mental health symptoms weren't often handled as well. In neuro rehab, we had someone to work with them, so I felt like it was addressed, but still, I found that no one is really talking about their trauma. So it felt like a natural step for me to get trained in an evidence-based trauma modality to address that need in the people that I was seeing. At that time, when I started my practice, it was 2013. So in 2013, there wasn't access to virtual trainings like we have now. I had just had a baby and I could not imagine leaving the baby for a whole weekend or multiple weekends to get training in EMDR. So I did a PESI EMDR training, and I I thought it was a really great training. I really did enjoy the training, but I didn't feel competent yet. And there wasn't a model of consultation they said, get consultation before you do it or practice on peers, which I didn't have any peers to practice with, so I didn't practice, but I still started working and working with clients and using the model, but I was really cautious about using it. So I still feel like I didn't get the training and the consultation that I needed to feel effective in doing it. And it would have helped if I had more of that apprenticeship model with ongoing consultation. And I feel like the EMDRIA, not that I have any association with EMDRIA because I don't, there's I think issues with some of these bigger training companies, which is why they feel very MLM like. Therapists have said that there's a vibe to that, there's a feel to that. And I like their model. However, I know that there's limited access for a lot of these bigger trainings. And when I did go through the full EMDRIA training and got the 50 hours, which included like 40 hours of training, and then the consultation was kind of built into the model, I felt much more capable and confident. And then even more so when I went ahead and did the additional 20 hours of consultation to get certified at EMDR. That I'm like, where did I feel that competency? Probably like midway through the certification process. So that kind of tells me that I felt like I got there in that process, and likely that was needed. And there was some deliberate practice involved with that, which I'll talk about in a little bit, that a lot of our training and certifications don't speak to deliberate practice. How are we working on that skill as therapists, as professionals? And I think I was salty for a minute because I am an EMDR consultant, so I do hold that credential. And I don't feel that way now because I'm actually using it in other ways with doing some trauma informed trainings like in my district. And I don't know how I will use that in the future, but I think because I didn't know exactly how I would use it, and it just felt like, well, it's the top level, which actually you can still be like a trainer, I guess, if you wanted to continue to be the top of something, that we just kind of follow these rungs of training without really thinking about, is the return on investment good for me? Is this something that is actually going to benefit my clients? Am I going to see more income from it? And I see some mixed things in what therapists are saying online where they say, some clients do reach out to me and they're looking for like a modality like IFS or EMDR. Some therapists just say it never really brought me another dime. Like I don't see any difference in getting it. For me, I really, if I go back to why I started looking at EMDR, it was because I needed to provide trauma therapy for my clients, and I didn't feel comfortable doing that. And so I think that served its purpose. However, I spent a lot of money on that certification, including the consultant piece. I think I calculated upwards of nearly $6,000. So maybe a drop in the bucket to what a lot of us spent educationally. And so I just think it's something to consider. Where would you want to stop? And I think kind of doing little checkpoints for yourself. Am I learning a skill and am I getting better at that skill? And do I feel more competent providing whatever it is? Maybe it's exposure response prevention, and you're doing that for OCD, and maybe you wanted to do some more trainings in that. And where would you feel like you gained the competency and that you had the feedback loop to have some deliberate practice? I think that's really helpful. It's interesting what other people have told me regarding how, or what I've listened to recently on some podcasts as I was researching this episode. And one of them was someone who actually heard at the MASP conference, Ray Krishner, who uh, talks about CBT and children, and had an episode where he talked about he reads an article a day, which is crazy to think about, but that is trying to work on a competency. Maybe you're thinking, I want to read more about trauma, or I want to listen to podcasts on trauma, or I want to listen to, for me, I'm kind of interested in compassion focused therapy. I don't know how I'm going to use it. I'm just interested in it. It's just kind of piquing my interest. And part of me wants to dive into a training or some kind of certification thing. But I kind of have promised myself that I'm going to do my own research into any like new modalities or models before I commit to doing more costly trainings on said topic. So I think it's just good to think about for yourself. Certifications aren't always the way to go. And we're thinking of just is if this training is effective, I think that is an important metric to look at as well. So when we look at some meta-analyses between EMDR, for example, and other trauma treatments, including TFCBT, it is pretty much equal, and sometimes TFCBT or cognitive processing therapy is superior. However, the literature is telling us that EMDR gets us there faster. So I think that's definitely a point in the EMDR bucket, because who wants to be doing trauma treatment at a slow pace? Not me. And I feel like when I got trained and using it with my own clients when I was doing EMDR, I felt like I sometimes did see miracles happen in front of my eyes. And that was amazing to see, to have someone really suffering and then have them do this therapy and they were better. So yeah, that 2025 systemic review showed that EMDR achieved equivalent outcomes to TFCBT, but generally required shorter treatment duration and placed a lower time burden on patients. Also found to be the most cost-effective intervention compared to 10 others, including TFCBT. So this is not an EMDR podcast, but I think it's just something, it's a helpful model to think about. I think one caveat there is also there were some small sample sizes, so take that with a grain of salt, that, you know, the data is still developing, as it always is, as science develops. Okay. So the EMDR debate will still keep on going, as will other therapy modalities. I think we can get into minutia about what we feel like we need to feel competent. And that also goes back to feeling like we don't know enough. And I feel like that's a burnout trap, which I'll segue into in just a minute. For me, I think the credential really wasn't the point. Getting generally competent through consultation and deliberate practice is what made the difference in having me feel comfortable with the model and really using it to fidelity. And I really felt like when burnout hit me in 2023, well, 2021 to 2025, yeah, it was a long bout, acutely 21 to 23. I think training felt like the answer in many ways because I was starting something new and it felt like it was a road to go there. And it's also something I did when I started my doctoral program. So, Burnout 1.0 for me was working as a foster care caseworker. And I knew I couldn't do that work anymore. And I was in my 20s. I was like, okay, that's not it. So, I went for my doctoral degree and I delayed working really full time and doing education, kind of building, still learning, still growing. And we can still do that without thousands of dollars in debt. My friends, we don't have to do that. So I think it's much easier when burnout hits to go do training, to start something and layer something more, because it's number one, it's a distraction from what is wrong. So instead of addressing this thing is really hard and I don't know what to do with the hard, we're on a side quest to do something else. Like the side quest is going to help us solve the problem we actually need to solve, but it usually never does. I can speak this from experience because I definitely know this from my own truth. So it feels productive. It feels safe. It's education. We're going to use it. You can always invest in your education, right? That's a good investment. until it's not. But my real problems were I was isolated in private practice, was really outputting too much caring, including and in my home life with my very small children. They were taking my emotional bandwidth. There was financial pressure. I had very limited peer or social support. Certification does not address any of that, although consultation can. So there is a little place there, but just the certification alone doesn't address all of that. I think I say this with the most kindness. When we feel ineffective or burned out, training can feel like agency. However, it can also be avoidance. If we're not looking at structurally what is wrong in our career, in our life, in our practice, in the work. And I feel like research actually backs me up on this. So you might have heard of this study. So it's called the dodo bird effect. And that is that many therapy modalities produce similar outcomes. I think most of us have heard this. Like the type of therapy doesn't really matter as much as other factors. So a meta-analysis confirms this with some variation, with some things to think about, of course. It's not just, it always depends in psychology. That's the answer. So, but 90 controlled trials from 2014 to 2024, an N of over 9,000 comparing CBT, psychodynamic, person-centered, art and mindfulness therapies. And the outcomes were not moderated by modality or diagnosis across 18 conditions, all 5 modalities loaded onto one single variable. And so the dodo bird effect is strongest comparing bona fide therapies head-to-head across general populations. So I think kind of a clean summary for this 2025 meta-analysis is that where you end up in therapy doesn't depend on how you got there, but some roads are faster than other. And that previous EMDR study also mentioned that it gets you there faster. And those are pretty much your mindfulness-based modalities are going to help get you there more quickly. However, I think looking at the contextual model, what drives outcomes the most is the therapeutic alliance. I know many of us have heard this before, but you need to hear it again, because I think we get wrapped up into this certification world that we're not enough if we don't have an EMDR certification or an IFS certification, which IFS just does not have the randomized controlled studies that I'm comfortable with investing that kind of money in. Certainly do a training, like check it out. Like maybe that's useful in your practice, but for me to drop that kind of IFS certification money, no, not without the evidence. Maybe it'll get there one day and I'll be like, oh, well, that actually is really cool. And I want to do that, but I don't see the evidence there for me to want to do that. And like, if that's something you use, good for you. Therapeutic alliance, empathy. And so empathy has so many implications for burnout, because when I studied in my dissertation, empathy is one of those things that can be a driver of compassion satisfaction, or feeling like I feel more fulfilled with the work, that the trauma exposure has led to some positive outcomes for me. And also it has the effect of being loaded for compassion fatigue. So having that kind of empathy rather is this conduit to caring. And it's a double-edged sword. We see that in the research. Hopefully that's clear how that came out. Positive regard. So seeing our clients positively and that we care for them no matter what, even whatever they bring in. Therapist responsiveness. These aren't modality specific things. These are the things that drive outcomes more than modality. So those effect sizes were 0.8. Modality maybe is like 0.1, 0.2. So if we need to do anything, it's thinking about how do we grow our ability to have more empathy for our clients? How do we grow our ability to have more positive regard, to have more therapists, have more responsiveness in the room? Probably doing less things for the therapist to do. So what actually helps us improve from the research is consultation, supervision, feedback, and deliberate practice, not collecting credentials, even though I have done that. It's okay if you've done that or fall into that trap. That's okay. So, if our research doesn't point to certifications, what does the ecosystem look like? Why are we gotten here? Many of these trainings follow a similar pattern. We get our initial training, we go to advanced training, we have consultation hours, then we reach our certification, then we reach consultant status, and then trainer status. A lot of these rungs are going up, cost money and time to lead to the next rung. And all of those people at the top, they're not selling to clients, they're selling directly to that downstream. That's kind of that definition of the MLM, is they're selling to other people that are buying from them, right? So if I was kind of enamored actually with I don't know if you guys remember LuLaRoe. Most of the people that listen to this are probably my contemporaries and are women. So there was this phase when I was having my children of LuLaRoe leggings. And I remember distinctly sitting in like this nursing group with me and my little baby, and this new mom came in. Her baby was like 4 months old. So she seemed like some kind of sage walking into this nursing group, and here am I, just like, I barely made it in there. I think I cried after it because I gave some woman in the group like my phone number hoping I'd make a friend, because I was so sad in my postpartum days and felt so alone and just hoping to like find a friend. And gosh, poor Jen. I'm just thinking of my poor little postpartum self. I send you so much love, my dear. Anyways, she just seemed like all put together with her LuLaRoe outfit, and I had some friends that got into it. And so that model, the people that they would buy into the LuLaRoe, like you had to pay thousands of dollars and you'd get like a box of like cheap leggings. I mean, they weren't very good quality. We all know that by now. They were comfortable though, very comfortable. And those people made their money by selling people into the program, which at the top levels of some of these therapy certifications, they make all their money from other therapists buying their trainings and said certification, consultant hours, all this stuff, right? That's why it's not really an MLM, but it feels that way, right? It feels that way because it's this ecosystem of training. And it's only a few people making the big bucks from that. It's not the everyday consultants who are providing that to other therapists. I felt no type of salt by giving money to another therapist who was a consultant who provided my training. They provided me great training, and I think I really valued that time. I think what we be wary of is the same companies that sell the CE also certify. So in training, in certifications where other people can train you and you're certified by that body, that's fine. But sometimes, and I won't name specific companies where that training is through the company and the certification is through the company, those are the only two places you can get that training. That's problematic because all the money stays in that ecosystem. And so they're incentivized to keep that money in that ecosystem. I think also in the last several years, we've seen the proliferation of very low barrier certifications that certify therapists on as few as 21 online CE hours. So I won't name them because this is a public podcast. I don't want people coming after me. But let's say you can be trained in CBT, example, for doing a 3-day training, and you are now a CBT certified therapist. And I don't know if that certification actually exists, but let's say I'm making it up, that I'm doing made up name CBT therapist, for example. And in the fine print, certification does not imply endorsement of clinical competency. That's problematic, isn't it? right there on the webpage, it says that. The certification doesn't mean you're competent. It means you completed the hours. And I think if we're saying that, then it is not worth anything. It's not the paper it's printed on, essentially. And I think if we compare more rigorous, independent governed certifications, and I wanted to do DBT, for example, again, I don't have any affiliation with these people. I'm a EMDRIA consultant, however, but I don't have any, I'm not promoting anything with them. So I have not done any formal DBT training, so I looked at them just for an example. And I looked at one, I'm not going to say the name of the other low barrier DBT one, but I looked at a low barrier one. And so one of those for the DBT Lenahan board certification, all public information, by the way, 40 hours of didactic training. That's a minimum. That's similar to EMDR. And the other one was 21 hours of an online CE. And then there was a 12-month plus of active on a DBT consultation team for that DBT Lenahan board certification. And the other one was a self-attested clinical hours. For the DBT written knowledge exam, no exam for the other one. DBT 3 consecutive videotape sessions coded for adherence. The other one, nothing. The other one is an independent nonprofit separate from all training organizations. The other one, the same company issues that. And also, if you fail twice for that DBT Lenahan one, you have to wait 12 months. That's legit. And the other one, fine print, it does not imply clinical competency. So I think interesting to look at anything you choose to purchase, that we're trying to looking at it from this lens. I'm not saying that if you do training through a company that is maybe not seen as recognized, that it's not worth it. I have gone to those trainings and I've gotten something out of it. I think that has benefited my practice. I think you have to look at the ecosystem and look at your investment to see if it's something you want to do, and make sure you know it's not an escape hatch for your burnout. Also, when I talked to people on LinkedIn, I'm going to go through some of the LinkedIn posts that people put on there just to give you some feedback as well, what our peers are saying about this. They thought certification can deepen skills and build confidence, but many therapists say they rarely increase their income. Most clients, and that is my experience as well, never ask you about your certifications. They really don't care. They want to know, do you do EMDR? Can you help me with my problem? If you say yes and yes, then we're good to go. And if, like the first session feels right, good. I feel like early career therapists can't afford these rigorous trainings often. And these low barrier options can fill in that vacuum, which is understandable. It's understandable you want to get a low cost training. And so I think it muddies what that certification credential actually means for you, wanting to build more competence in a particular model for a particular reason. And I think we need to ask ourselves, what is this specialization actually for? Why do we want to do that? I still think if I go back to why I first wanted to do EMDR training, I liked my reasons. I wanted the EMDR training because I needed a trauma model to help my clients with brain injuries. I wish I didn't take such a big circuitous route and do all the trainings that I probably did, but here I am. It got me where I am today. I don't know if I would have done it differently. I don't know if I could have due to my life stage. So perhaps that means, do I want to do some trainings that maybe are lower cost? I'm not going to go through one of these huge certifications to get my feet wet. Maybe I'm going to listen to some podcasts. Maybe I'm going to read a book, listen to an audiobook, try to have a deliberate practice of, I'm going to learn something for the next 3 months about this model to see if this is applicable to my practice, if I want to deepen my knowledge in this area. Okay. So I would say specialization in something really sits at the intersection of three things: what you care about, your values, what you're naturally good at, your aptitudes, and what you can sustain in practice. So if it has viability for you. So for me, brain injury work that I did came by accident. I needed a postdoc. I cold called them because I did not have a postdoc to complete my training. It's a whole nother side quest that I went on, but basically it was in the last economic downturn. I lost my job. I had to find a new one. And I'm so glad that I got that experience. It was great. Some of the best career fits we stumble into, but it doesn't mean that we have to stay there, right? I found that working with people with a brain injury, it was really intense work. And so I probably shouldn't have had a whole caseload of that particular population because it was a very high need population. So maybe I wanted to mix in some other clients that maybe were better aligned and maybe more sustainable for me to do. Also, many clients after a brain injury cannot work. So many of those clients, when I needed to come off of insurance panels because that wasn't financially working for me, they couldn't private pay because they weren't working. So again, you have to think about, is this financially viable for me to stay in this particular niche? Now, EMDR generally was, I don't know, people sought it out. I would have people come into my practice, but some of that work was more draining. So my emotional resources were taxed in that, and it was more difficult. The EMDR work that felt more aligned for me was actually in first responder work, which I didn't really have any training with, but some people kind of filtered in just because I had EMDR experience. And I found that was really, I loved it. I really liked working with people who were other helpers and therapists. So I found that I really liked that work. So I think going back to what I started with and what I want to leave you with is that I think I spent most of this episode talking about certifications and when to kind of think of, like, when do we want to do that? So let me leave you with this little guide. When should you get a certification? When does it make sense? Maybe you're already working with a population. You want a structured, rigorous training to deepen what you're doing. So the work led you there, not the credential. You have my example for that. The certification body is independent from the training organization and it requires demonstrated competency. So I had some of that in my certification. I think some other models do more of that or have you do some therapy in the process of the training. So having some like observed practice, exams, assessed work, I had to present cases and have like transcripts of sessions. There's a concrete structural reason. Maybe like there is a referral network there, a population kind of requires it. Not just it'll make me feel more legitimate. I'm thinking of like work with OCD or work with folks with eating disorders. Perhaps you want to do it for some reasons like that. When is it the wrong move? When you're burned out and it feels like more of a production, like you're being productive, you're doing something. That is a structural problem that a credential will not fix. You are hoping it'll fill your caseload or justify raising rates. Clients rarely ask about certifications or credentials, and they rarely drive income in the way that therapists expect. You're chasing confidence that you don't have. So consultation, supervision, and deliberate practice build that, but the credential can follow that competence. It doesn't create it. So I would say there's some confidence that happened. I felt more confident in the EMDR model, so maybe I'm going back on this, but not solely that's the reason why I want to do this, because I'm feeling like ineffective, for example. Also the wrong move if you can't afford it. If you're maybe in your very early career or there's financial pressure that puts a credential that won't move the needle. It's kind of a bad trade. So I would invest in some general consultation first to kind of see what you need. And I'd love for more early career folks to do, EMDR training, DBT training, or one of these modalities of care as part of their training. And so sometimes you see people giving breaks on some of these trainings to early career therapists or trainees. So look out for that if you're a trainee. How do you know if a certification is legitimate? So, is the certification body independent from the organization selling the training? That is probably one of our first things to think about. If it's a closed loop, we have a problem. If it doesn't require some demonstrated competency, like observing things, a video, an exam, something, attesting to hours is not the same thing as having your clinical work reviewed. How to know if burnout is your real issue? Ask yourself honestly, is the problem what I know or how I'm working? And just sit with that for a minute. Notice when you're doing training, what that brings up for you. What is it doing? If it feels like an answer for you and you've been in a training, what are things that feel relieving about that? For me, it's being with other people and talking. So I need to find other ways to talk more with other professionals, perhaps. So asking yourself, do I have enough peer connection? Is my caseload sustainable? Am I getting consultation on my hardest cases? These are harder problems, but it is probably less expensive than buying a huge training. So I'm going to end it here for this episode. It is taking me a couple of weeks to record this, and it is like, in the 40-minute mark at this point. So I'm going to put a cap on it. And in the next episode, I'm going to talk about kind of my personal reasons, like why I've done all of this, like I've talked about. And I think some of the reasons that surprised me, of course, like I think there's serendipity. And in the course of this process, I found a new dog walker who is actually an ornithologist, which is like a bird doctor. And they told me that that's what they do full time now is walk dogs because academia had them feel like things were never done. So I'll talk about my reactions to that. So tune in next week. I'm going a little more personal for that episode. And then after that episode, I'm going to talk about the LinkedIn roundup where I had over 40 therapists respond to my question about certifications and naming, like, what are we even doing here? And talking about like money, like, does it actually make you any more money? Spoiler alert, no. And also another therapist who said that they removed their certification from their email signature and felt like that was doing free advertisement for that brand and certification. So that one is coming. I think you'll feel very seen. And I always think about new therapists to this field who are just coming in and wanting guidance on some of these things. And so I feel this kind of duty to you guys as well, who are new in the field, listening to this as well as those that are more seasoned, maybe like me, who are kind of reckoning with all of this. So I look forward to sharing that with you. I've relaunched my newsletter, and so it has not come out for the past month. Sorry that I have not been on the podcast, but March Madness, as it turns out, is just not for basketball if you work in schools because it is just a long month. There are not breaks usually, at least here in New England. And I have been really, really, really busy with that work. So I have not really podcasted, and I've just been experimenting with doing less. And so part of that was this podcast, and I've been running a group. So I've been running the Leaving the Chair group for therapist, it's just great. And so I want to share more of that. Maybe I'll be sharing more of that in May as I'm kind of wrapping up that group and just sharing some reflections, just some beautiful humans that are in that group that I have really grown to adore. And so I'll be sharing more about that probably in May. And so I'm going to be on this certification train episode for a few episodes. And there's just going to be a little like thesis that I talk about with impostering in there on the next episode. And then I want to talk to you about sabbaticals as we start to think about late spring and summer, because I'm taking July and most of August off and really part of June. So 2 full months off. And I'm not even sure like what actually I'm doing for work after that point. And it's like totally okay, which I could have never said like 3 to 4 years ago that I'd be kind of okay with that, which means I may have to like not have a job and figure that out, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. So I hope maybe that gives some people hope, because I was clinging so tightly to the practice. And what does this mean if I can't do this anymore? Just to give you some permission that we can still figure things out. We can still like find the next thing for ourselves if we don't know. So I would offer you that. So sign up for my newsletter. So it's the Leaving the Chair newsletter. And that's if you're trying to leave the chair of overwhelm, burnout, overscheduling, and sometimes the therapy chair. And so twice monthly, I'm putting this out, and it's a really great resource for you guys. So I really see this as like a premium free offer that I'm doing for you. So I'd love to give you that resource if you are just burnt to a crispy crisp. Okay. Have a good one.